to the future generation. Someday in the future, someone else will break that record. Let's work together to break those other records. Thanks for everything, and God bless America.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader. There will be order in the Senate. Majority Leader.
I have a resolution at the desk. I ask that it now be considered.
Clerk will report.
S. Res. 5, electing Gary B. Myrick of Virginia as Secretary for the majority of the Senate.
Without objection, the resolution is considered and agreed to.
Move to reconsider that vote by which the resolution was agreed to.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I have a resolution at the desk. I ask the clerk report the same.
If the Leader will withhold for a moment, the Chair, on behalf of the President pro tempore, pursuant to Public Law 95-521, appoints Morgan J. Frankel as Senate Legal Counsel for a term of service to expire at the end of the 113th Congress. The Clerk will report the resolution.
S. Res. 6, to make effective appointment of Senate Legal Counsel.
Without objection, the resolution is considered and agreed to. The Chair, on behalf of the President pro tempore, pursuant to Public Law 95-521, appoints Patricia McBrien as Deputy Senate Legal Counsel for a term of service to expire at the end of the 113th Congress. The Clerk will report the resolution.
Mr. President, would the Chair have order in the Senate while the President pro tempore takes...
The Senate will be in order, please. The Senate will be in order.
The President pro tempore of the Senate is going to now assume the presidency of the Senate. President.
The clerk will report the resolution.
S. Res. 7, to make effective appointment of Deputy Senate Legal Counsel.
Without objection, considered and passed.
Ask that I would move to reconsider that vote.
I move to lay it on the table.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I send to the desk on block 12 unanimous consent requests, and I ask for their consideration on block, that the request be agreed to on block, and that the motion to reconsider be the adoption of these requests. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The motion to reconsider the adoption of these requests be laid upon the table, and that they appear separately in the record. Before the Chair rules, I would like to point out that these requests are routine and done at the beginning of each new Congress. They entail issues such as authority for the Ethics Committee to meet and other such things.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent for the duration of the 112th Congress, the Ethics Committee be authorized to meet during the sessions of the Senate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I now ask unanimous consent that a colloquy between myself and the Republican leader regarding the establishment of a new working group on executive nominations be inserted at this point in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the first day for the introduction of bills and joint resolutions in the 112th Congress be Tuesday, January 25th, 2011.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
Mr. President, I have a resolution at the desk. I ask the clerk to report the same.
The clerk will report.
S-Con-Res 1, providing for a conditional recess or adjournment of the Senate and an adjournment of the House of Representatives.
The resolution is considered and agreed to.
Mr. President, that resolution's been agreed to. That being the case, I move to reconsider that vote.
Without objections, ordered.
I move to lay it on the table.
Mr. President, Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to all my colleagues, those returning to the Senate and those taking office today for the first time. I'm honored, humbled, and will forever be grateful that the people of Nevada entrusted me with another term as a United States Senator. I'll continue working hard to create jobs for the people of my state and our country and get our country back on track. Mr. President, I'm also grateful for the continued support and confidence of my caucus, which has given me the honor of serving as its leader. Neither title, Senator or Majority Leader, is a responsibility I take lightly or for granted. They say you can never step in the same river twice. New water flows in, replacing the old and continually renewing the river. The Senate is the same, Mr. President. This body never stops changing. Every 2 years, and occasionally more frequently, new senators take their seats in this chamber. They join the Senate family and this ever-evolving team of 100 tasked with moving the country forward. But our fundamental responsibilities and traditions anchor us in that river. Our respect and reverence for the people we serve and this institution never wavers or changes. Mr. President, according to academics, pundits, and Congress watchers, the 111th Congress, the last Congress, was the most productive in American history. But many challenges and opportunities still lie ahead for this new Congress. It starts today. We have to do even more to help middle-class families, to create jobs, to hasten our energy independence, to improve our children's education, and to fix our broken immigration system. We also have to make sure the Senate can operate in a way that allows the people's elected legislators to legislate. So we'll soon debate some reforms to Senate procedure, reforms proposed not for the sake of change itself or for partisan gain, but because the current system has been abused and abused gratuitously. The filibuster in particular has been abused in truly unprecedented fashion. There are strong passions on both sides of this debate of this issue. There are nearly as many opinions about what to do about these abuses as there are senators. But let us start the conversation with some facts. Mr. President, could we have order?
The Senate will come to order. Senators will please take their conversations off the floor. The Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Here are some of those facts. There were about as many filibusters in the last two Congresses as there were in the first 6.5 decades that the cloture rules existed. There were nearly as many filibusters in just the last 2 years as there were in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, and half of the 1970s, all combined. In the entire 19th century, the Senate saw fewer than 12, a dozen filibusters. Now we see that many in a single month. Many of these recent filibusters were terribly unproductive. Many of them prevented us from even holding a debate on a bill, let alone an up or down vote. After we wasted hour after hour, day after day, sometimes weeks, many of those bills passed and many of those nominations were confirmed overwhelmingly and sometimes unanimously. I've been forced to use my right as Majority Leader to fill what we call the amendment tree, more than I would have liked to. But it's been for a simple reason, Mr. President. Rather than offer amendments to improve legislation or compromise for the greater good, as members of this body have done for generations. The current minority has offered amendments simply to waste time, delay us from proceeding to a bill, or to score political points. American people love government, but they don't like too much politics in government. Finally, these rules are central to the Senate, but they're not sacrosanct. Senate procedure and cloture rules have changed since this institution was founded at the beginning of this country, when necessary and after serious consideration. Those decisions have never been made without great deliberation, and no future change should be made any differently. The recent abuses we've seen have hurt the Senate and hurt our country. They hurt our economic recovery, and they hurt middle-class families. They hurt the institutions that lead and shape America because they keep public servants and judges from their posts for no reason other than partisanship. Even Chief Justice Roberts criticized the Senate a few days ago for how few judges we confirm and how slowly we do even the few we confirm. His criticism and concern are well-founded. I hope all my colleagues consider the Chief Justice's warning and that what it means for the pursuit of justice in this country. Mr. President, really here's the bottom line. We may not agree yet on how to fix the problem, but no one can credibly claim problems don't exist. No one who has watched this body operate since the current minority took office can say that it functions just fine. That wouldn't be true, it would be dishonest. No one can deny that the filibuster has been used for purely political reasons, reasons far beyond those for which this protection was invented and intended. So, Mr. President, I say through the chair to my distinguished Republican counterpart, my friend, Senator McConnell, in the coming days, let's come together to find a solution. That's why we're here. I say to the 16 new senators, we need to do some things to correct some of the things that have taken place. The United States senators must solve problems, not create them. And I'm going to work to the best of my ability with my friend, the senator from Kentucky, to work this out, to work out a compromise. The last time Congress convened without Senator Robert Byrd as a member, Harry Truman was President of the United States. 42 of our 100 senators hadn't even been born yet. No one knew the Constitution better than Robert Byrd, and no one revered it more. He taught many of us many things. Among them, he taught me to carry the Constitution with me every day. I do that, Mr. President. I always have this copy of our founding document in my pocket, signed by Senator Byrd, one of the most fervent defenders of the Constitution. He's given me two of them. The first one wore out, but I have it in my desk in Searchlight. And I have such fondness of looking at Senator Byrd. As we all know, in his later years, he had a benign tremor and he shook a little bit when he wrote. But he wrote this, and I'll always remember Senator Byrd, a fervent defender of this Constitution. He loved the Constitution. This coal miner's son loved the Constitution, just like everyone in America, whether you're a coal miner's son or an academic's son, we all should love this Constitution, not just because of what's written in it, but how those words were written and how it all came together. Senator Byrd knew that our Constitution was created through compromise. At a moment of particular partisan strife 15 years ago, Senator Byrd came to this floor and said the following, and I quote, "I hope that we will all look at ourselves on both sides of this aisle and understand also that we must work together in harmony and with mutual respect for one another. This very charter," talking about the Constitution, "under which we live, was created in a spirit of compromise and mutual concession. And it is only in that spirit that a continuance of this charter of government can be prolonged and sustained." That's what he said. Our friends in the House have decided to begin their daily business by reading the Constitution. In these first few minutes of the new Senate session, I think we should reflect on Senator Byrd's wise reminder of this Constitution's history. Unlike the Constitution, the agreement that established two separate and different houses in the legislative branch was itself a compromise. Mr. President, It's written to be the great compromise, allowed us to have a Constitution. As much as ever before, our two branches need to find common ground if we're going to be productive for the people that we serve and serve together. In that same speech, a decade and a half ago, Senator Byrd reminded us, I quote, "The welfare of the country is more dear than the mere victory of a political party," end of quote. I think we would do well to heed those words as we debate and decide how to best serve the nation and its people in this new year. Mr. President, senators come and go. Majorities and minorities rotate like a rolling wheel, and records of service are written and rewritten. The only constant in our and in this great democracy is a change that we never anticipate. Sometimes we do, but most often we don't. 16 senators who were here just a few days ago have moved on, and 16 new ones now take their seats. Laws that govern this nation and rules that govern this body continue to evolve carefully and by necessity. But the most important change we can make in the 112th Congress is to work better and more closely as teammates, not as opponents, as partners, not as partisans, to fulfill our constitutional responsibility to pursue the more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
President.
The Republican leader is recognized.
Mr. President, first, I'd like to take a moment to welcome back all of my colleagues, and particularly the 13 new Republican senators who we officially swore in just a few moments ago. Americans are looking for creative, principled leaders. I'm confident this impressive class of new Republicans will not disappoint. I'd also like to welcome my good friend, the Majority Leader. At a time when some people think the two parties in Washington can't even agree on the weather, I'll note that Senator Reid and I get along just fine. I expect it will stay that way, and I look forward to working with him again throughout this Congress. The biggest changes today are, of course, happening across the Dome, and I'd like to welcome the many new Republican members of Congress who've come to Washington to change the way things are done around here. In this, they'll be led by a very talented and determined Ohioan, whom I now have the great honor of referring to as Speaker Boehner. I congratulate Speaker Boehner and the new Republican majority in the House, and I wish them great success in achieving the kinds of reforms and policies the last election was all about. Americans want lawmakers to cut Washington spending, tackle the debt, rein in the government, and to help create the right conditions for private sector job growth. They also want us to reform the way laws are made. They're looking to Republicans to provide an alternative to the kind of lawmaking we've seen too much of around here in the past few years. A vision that disregards the views of the public in favor of an elite few. A vision that tells people they can look at legislation after it's passed, that Washington knows best. In short, Americans are looking for an entirely different approach. The new Republican majority in the House has shown every sign that they've heard the public on all of this. And Senate Republicans join them in their efforts, conscious of the limitations and the opportunities that our minority status and the President's veto pen involve. We will press the majority to do the things the American people clearly want us to do. And we will insist in every possible way that the voices of our constituents are heard, realizing at the same time that the best solutions are forged through consensus, not through confrontation. Now, fortunately, the Senate was designed as a place where consensus could and would be reached. Look through modern history. The Social Security Act of 1935 was approved by all but 6 members of the Senate. The Medicare and Medicaid Acts of 1965 were approved by all but 21. And all but 8 senators voted for the Americans with Disabilities Act 21 years ago this year. The lesson is clear. Americans believe that on issues of this importance, one party shouldn't be allowed to force its will on anyone else. And thanks to the Senate, it rarely has. And that's why a recent proposal to change the Senate's rules by some on the other side is such a bad idea. For 2 years, Americans have been telling us that they're tired of being shut out of the legislative process. They want to be heard. And the response they're now getting from some on the other side instead is a proposal to change the Senate rules so they can continue to do exactly what they want with fewer members than before. Instead of changing their behavior in response to the last election, they want to change the rules. Well, I would suggest that this is precisely the kind of approach a supermajority standard is meant to prevent. It exists to preserve the Senate's role as the one place where the voices of all of the people will, in the end, be heard. And as a result, it has helped ensure that most major agreements enjoy the broad support of the public and the stability that comes with it. Regrettably, the current majority has too often lost sight of this important truth. Since assuming control of the Senate in 2007, it has sought to erode the traditional rights of the minority and, by extension, the rights of our constituents. The Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service has looked into the way the current majority has run the Senate. Its conclusions are revealing. Here are just a few. The current majority has denied the minority the right to amend legislation a record 44 times, or more often than the last 6 majorities combined. It has moved to shut down debate. The same-day measures are considered nearly 3 times more often on average than the previous 6 majorities. And its unprecedented denial of the rights of the minority to debate and amend on the floor is compounded by its practice of regularly bypassing Senate committees. All too often, the majority has chosen to write bills behind closed doors, depriving Americans of yet another opportunity to have a say in the legislative process. The current majority has set the record here as well, bypassing committees 43 times, or double the previous average. Now, the goal of all of this, of course, is to pass the most partisan legislation possible while at the same time avoiding difficult votes. And to listen to the leaders of the Democratic Party over the past several months, they've had some success at it. The President, the former Speaker, the Majority Leader have all described this past Congress as the most successful in memory. And yet the most vocal elements of their party remain frustrated. They say the Senate is broken, even though the same people are describing it as the most successful in memory. Why? Why, their primary complaints appear to be these. The stimulus passed, but it wasn't big enough. The health care passed, but it didn't include the government plan. The Senate extended unemployment benefits and cut payroll taxes, but was blocked from raising taxes on small business owners in the process. In other words, the majority had been able to achieve most of what it wanted, but because it didn't achieve everything it wanted, some aren't happy. They're not happy that those Americans who have a different view of things actually had a say in how some of the legislation they've passed over the past 2 years turned out. Now, the impulse to change the rules is in some ways understandable. No one likes to take difficult votes. But that's nothing new. As the majority whip often says, if you don't like fighting fires, then don't become a fireman. And if you don't like casting votes, don't come to the Senate. Some have also suggested that one's view of the filibuster depends on where one sits. And it's true that when I was in the majority, I opposed filibustering judicial nominees. But I opposed doing so when I was in the minority as well. And I opposed doing so regardless of who was in the White House. In short, I was against expanding the use of the filibuster into an area in which it traditionally had not been used, period. One can agree with that view or not, but it's one thing to disagree with expanding the use of the filibuster into non-traditional areas, regardless of who is president and who is in the minority. It's another thing altogether to be in favor of expanding it when one is in the minority and then turn around and urge its elimination when one is in the majority. When it comes to preserving the right to extended debate on legislation, Republicans have been entirely consistent. What's being considered here is unprecedented. No Senate majority has ever, I'm going to say this twice, no Senate majority has ever changed the rules except by following those rules. That is, with the participation and the agreement of the minority. I'm going to say it one more time. No Senate majority has ever changed the rules except by following those rules. That is, with the participation and the agreement of the minority. But it also promises to frustrate those who would approve it. First, it's stating the obvious that anything that passes in the Senate with a narrower majority than 60 is going nowhere, absolutely nowhere, in the newly Republican House. So any short-term gain ends halfway across the dome. Second, a change in the rules aimed at benefiting Democrats today could just as easily be used to benefit Republicans tomorrow. Do our friends across the aisle really want to create a situation where 2 or 4 or 6 years from now they suddenly find themselves completely powerless to prevent Republicans from overturning legislation they themselves have worked so hard to enact, particularly over the last 2 years? But the larger point is this. The founders crafted the Senate to be different. They crafted it to be deliberate, a thoughtful place, and changing the rules in the way that's been proposed would unalterably change the Senate itself. It will no longer be the place where the whole country is heard and has the ability to have its say, a place that encourages consensus and broad agreement. In short, it would make this place even less like the place Americans want it to be. So it's my hope that our friends on the other side will put aside their plans, respect the rules of the Senate, and more importantly, the voice of the people those rules are meant to protect. Then we can get about the business the people sent us here to do. Today is a day to renew our purpose and our commitment to bipartisanship, not to double down on a partisan approach that has too often marred lawmaking in Washington over the past 2 years. It is a day to look ahead to what we can achieve together, prompted by the urgings of an electorate that has made its views very clear, and united by a love for this institution and this nation. The problems we face are enormous, once-in-a-generation challenges that will require vision, hard work, and a commitment to work together to reach consensus. And the Senate is the place for that. At its best, it is a workshop where the nation's most difficult challenges are faced squarely and addressed with civility and goodwill. And at a time like our own, when 1 in 10 working Americans is looking for a job and can't find one, when the national debt threatens the American dream itself, when the solvency of the social safety net is threatened, we must come together. We must find a way to forget the petty skirmishes of the past and forge a new, more hopeful path. We must be motivated by a determination to seek solutions, not mere partisan advantages. Americans are looking for Republicans to address the problems we face. But Republicans cannot solve them alone. The problems are too big, too demanding for one party. And we will never succeed in solving them if we retreat to our corners until another election comes around. If our predecessors had done that, they would have never solved anything at all. And this institution would have lost its relevance a long time ago. But they didn't, and neither can we. The men who established this place have left us the right tools for the job. And it's my hope that in the weeks and months ahead we will use them to renew the promise that inspired them and that continues to inspire Americans, even in difficult times. That promise is the American dream. It's what unites everyone in this chamber. Preserving it must be our common task. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader is recognized.
I now ask for unanimous consent the Senate proceed to a period of morning business. That there be 30 minutes for tributes regarding Senator Mikulski's milestone. Upon conclusion of Mikulski-related remarks, there be 45 minutes for for Senator Harkin. Upon conclusion of Senator Harkin's remarks, the Republican leader or his designee control the next 45 minutes. Further, that following that time, controlled by the Republican leader, senators will be permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Is there objection? Without objection, so
Thank you, Mr.
ordered.
President.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
So the start of the 112th Congress, if you've just joined us here on C-SPAN 2, we've had the swearing in of the newly elected senators, some 34 of them. In fact, right now at this hour in the old Senate chamber, a reenactment, ceremonial reenactment, and that way photographers can take pictures, and we have coverage of that for you on C-SPAN 3. The Associated Press reporting this: on the first day of the new Congress today, a group of Senate Democrats plans to propose changes that would make it harder for the minority to delay legislation by filibuster. In fact, we heard Senator McConnell speaking about that a little bit. The AP story goes on to say, although Republicans will control the House, Democrats still hold on to the Senate, but they will be 7 senators short of the 60 required to break such logjams. Filibuster rules were last changed more than a quarter century ago when the number of votes needed to end the stalling tactic was reduced to 60. Before that, a 2/3 majority was needed. That, according to the Associated Press. And we will continue our coverage here on C-SPAN 2. In the House, the election of the new majority.
My dear friend and seatmate on the Appropriations Committee and a member of my Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, Senator Mikulski, I ask unanimous consent that these remarks regarding Senator Mikulski be inserted in the record after the remarks earlier by Senator Mikulski.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I join with the entire Senate family in saluting my good friend, the distinguished senator, senior senator from Maryland, on becoming the longest-serving woman in the history of the United States Senate. This is truly a remarkable milestone. I note that Cal Ripken, the former star of Senator Mikulski's hometown Baltimore Orioles, became known as the Iron Man for going 16 consecutive years without missing a game. Well, now, perhaps Senator Mikulski has earned the title of Iron Woman for going 24 consecutive years in this body without ever deviating from her role as a fierce advocate for Marylanders and for working people across our country. But I hasten to add, Mr. President, that the measure of a senator is not how many years he or she serves in the body, but what he or she accomplishes during those years. And that is where Senator Mikulski has truly distinguished herself over the last quarter of a century. I especially salute her activism and leadership on the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, formerly chaired, of course, by Senator Kennedy, and which I now am privileged to chair. She has been a leading champion of Pell Grants and for expanding access to higher education for students of modest means. And, of course, as has been stated, she has been the Senate's leading voice on women's health issues, fighting to ensure that women are included in clinical trials and medical research at the National Institutes of Health, and securing access to breast and cervical cancer screenings for women without health insurance. Senator Mikulski took the lead in writing the sections of the new health reform law that focuses on improving the quality of care. And at every turn in the drafting of that historic legislation, she fought to ensure that the unique health needs of women were fully recognized and accommodated. As chair of the Subcommittee on Retirement and Aging, Senator Mikulski has been an outspoken advocate for seniors, focusing especially on combating elder abuse and neglect. I know that she is especially proud of authoring the Spousal Anti-Impoverishment Act, which keeps seniors from going bankrupt while paying for a spouse's nursing home care. I might also add, Mr. President, no one has been a more fierce supporter of, defender of the right of poor people to have an attorney through the legal aid system in America. She has fought very hard to make sure that we strengthen the National Legal Services Corporation and to make sure that it receives adequate funding so that people who have no money aren't barred from the courthouse door. So, Mr. President, we admire the work of Barbara Mikulski not as a female senator per se, but as one of 100 senators. But on this day, we also recognize that she was the first woman elected to the Senate whose husband or father did not serve in high office. And we salute her as the proud dean among Senate women, who has gone to extraordinary lengths for so many years to mentor and guide newly arriving women senators of both parties. So I join with my colleagues in congratulating Senator Mikulski as our longest-serving female senator ever, and in wishing her many, many more years of accomplishment and service in the United States Senate.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. President, I rise today to add my voice to those of my colleagues as we commemorate an extraordinary milestone for a remarkable woman. Today, Senator Barbara Mikulski becomes the longest-serving woman United States Senator. For anyone who has had the privilege of working with or working for Senator Mikulski, this milestone comes as no surprise. She is a devoted public servant and a dogged advocate for her constituents. She has spent the vast majority of her life in public service as a social worker, as a member of the Baltimore City Council, then as a member of the House of Representatives, and finally as a United States Senator. With each step, Mr. President, her constituency got larger, and she worked even harder to fight for the people of Maryland. Senator Mikulski is no stranger to celebrating firsts or milestones. She was the first Democratic woman to be elected to the Senate in her own right without succeeding a spouse or a father. She was also the first woman to serve on the United States Senate Appropriations Committee. It is also worth reflecting on how far we've come in the 24 years since Senator Mikulski was first elected. She was one of only 2 women in the Senate in 1987. In the next Senate, as in the last Senate, we are now up to 17 female senators, meaning, Mr. President, that they can no longer call us Sweet 16. As the Dean of Women Senators, Senator Mikulski has always been ready to help women who are thinking about running for the Senate and then help newly arrived women senators when they get here. Her wise counsel is absolutely invaluable. Senator Mikulski has always reached across the aisle to bring women senators together. As she puts it, women in the Senate understand issues not just on the macro level, but on the macaroni and cheese level. 2 years ago, around this time, I went to the Senate floor with several of my women colleagues to speak about the importance of passing the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. Senator Mikulski had championed the bill for years. I remember Senator Mikulski bringing us all together, and I will always remember her words. She would say, to the women of America, suit up, square your shoulders, put your lipstick on, and get ready for a revolution. Senator Mikulski has always been a master of words and quips, and she did it again, and we passed that bill. On that issue, as on so many others, the cause that Senator Mikulski championed was victorious, due in larger part to her tremendous work ethic and her devoted advocacy. Senator Mikulski, today we salute you for suiting up and squaring your shoulders for 24 years and counting, and we look forward to so many more. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I see that my great colleague, Senator Stabenow from the state of Michigan, is here.
President.
Senator from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm so pleased to be here today and appreciate the words of the great senator from Minnesota. But I am very, very pleased to rise with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to pay tribute to somebody who is much more than a colleague, someone who is also a mentor and a great, great friend, the senator from Maryland, Barbara Mikulski. Today, as we all know, she became the longest-serving woman member of the United States Senate in the history of our nation. I have a 3-year-old granddaughter, Lily, who will be able to read now in the history books about not only her grandmother, but the woman who holds this record, Senator Barbara Mikulski, and all that she has done and all that she means to each of us, particularly as a role model for my granddaughter and other young children, other young women that will be coming after all of us. She's here today because she is bold and fearless and determined, as we all know. In 1986, when she first ran for the Senate, she looked for inspiration from her own great-grandmother, who came to the United States from Poland with no money and no job. But her great-grandmother knew the importance of hard work, and she built a life for her family here, a new beginning. And in so doing, opened the door for future generations. And I know that today, Mr. President, she is looking down from a special place with tremendous pride. When Senator Mikulski won that election, becoming the first Democratic woman to win a United States Senate seat in her own right, she carried on her great-grandmother's legacy, opening doors for future generations of women to follow in her footsteps. Thanks to that, there are more women serving in the U.S. Senate today than have ever served in the entire history of our great country before Senator Mikulski was elected in 1986. From the moment she arrived in this august body, she has been a tireless champion of working families of Maryland and across the country, and I'm proud to have partnered with her on so many important efforts to make sure that we are building things in America again and supporting the people who have built the great middle class of this country by their hard work. She grew up working in her parents' grocery store and understands the struggles of working families who want nothing more than to create a better life for their children and their grandchildren. She got her start in politics fighting to save the Fells Point neighborhood in Baltimore, stopping a proposed highway that would have divided a neighborhood and destroyed that community. Today, because of Senator Mikulski, Fells Point is a thriving residential and commercial community. She's continued from that day and every day fighting for neighborhoods and fighting for families and standing up for the men and women who work hard every day to make a better life for themselves and their families. When she first arrived in the Senate, she was one of only 2 women, as we know, 2 women senators. Before then, women were appointed to the worst committees, were locked out of the old boys club, and didn't have much of a voice. But she changed all that. She got appointed to the powerful Appropriations Committee, the first Democratic woman to do so, giving the women of America a voice for the first time on how we set our priorities for the investments of our country. But more importantly, she learned how to build coalitions, to work with her colleagues on both sides of the aisle, to get things done for the people that sent her here to work for them. Today, as Dean of the Women Senators, she continues that leadership. Thanks to her, the women of the Senate get together, both Democrats and Republicans, for fellowship and friendship on a regular basis. And now, following in her footsteps, there are women members on every single committee in the United States Senate, every committee important to the operations of our country's business. Her example shows us all the importance of hard work, determination, and courage. Mr. President, I congratulate my friend, Senator Mikulski, today on her great accomplishment and, most importantly, on a distinguished record of public service on behalf of the people of Maryland and our country. I thank her for all that she has done for me personally and for all of the other women in the Senate, the ones who have already followed in her footsteps and the many who are still to come. This is an exciting day for the history books, or as some of us like to say, another step in herstory. Her story, Barbara Mikulski's story, is a special one for our country. Thank you, Mr. President. I would suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
And as we wait for the Senate to continue here on this opening day, the start of the 112th Congress, a couple of updates. You can see on your screen the U.S. House just now completing the vote and electing John Boehner, the new Speaker of the House. We have live coverage for you on C-SPAN. Right now I can see that Speaker Boehner is being congratulated by members of the House. We're waiting for senators to come back, and we expect Democrats, they have said that they plan to propose changes that would make it harder for the minority to delay legislation by filibuster. So we're waiting for Senate Democrats to come and see what they will propose here today. On C-SPAN 3 right now, we have live coverage of the ceremonial reenactment of the swearing-in of newly elected senators and re-elected senators. Vice President Biden is taking pictures with some of the senators. We just saw several of them taking some pictures in the old Senate chamber. So that's our lineup for you here today. C-SPAN 2 right here, we have Senate coverage. On C-SPAN, we have the House, and C-SPAN 3 right now, some of the other things taking place around the Capitol. And as we wait for senators to come back and start filing bills or make some general speeches, here's how the Associated Press is reporting on the new Speaker of the House, Mr. Boehner. The man who becomes Speaker of the House today says the new Republican majority there is bringing in new energy. Republican leaders will be setting out quickly to vote on a repeal of President Obama's healthcare overhaul law, but that's not expected to get anywhere in the Senate. The AP story goes on to say the Republican upsurge ushers in a divided government in the run-up to the 2012 elections. And Speaker Boehner now, the Speaker of the House, has just a few moments ago received the applause of the gallery and the members of the House. Our coverage there on C-SPAN. Here on C-SPAN 2, we're waiting for the senators to come back to the floor, and we expect some movement by Democrats who say they will propose some changes in the rules of how the Senate does business. We're going to watch that here on C-SPAN 2. Associated Press reporting, which you've probably seen here on our screen, that Robert Gibbs, the White House press secretary and one of the most visible and forceful advocates for President Obama, is quitting his job to become an outside political advisor. That change among the many expected in the coming days. The AP goes on to say that the move allows Mr. Gibbs to leave the grinding pace of the press secretary's job while making some money giving speeches and spending more time with his family. It also changes the dynamic of the White House, particularly combined with a coming departure of senior advisor David Axelrod, who, like Gibbs, has been at Obama's side for his entire presidential run. That's the AP reporting on the departure announced by White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs. One other story making the AP wire today, former U.S. Senator Russ Feingold, who you'll note is not amongst the senators. He was defeated in his bid for re-election this November. He has decided to move from politics to the world of academia. Here's how the AP reports it. Marquette University Law School says Feingold will be a visiting professor of law starting in the spring semester. The Milwaukee school said today that the three-term Democratic senator will teach an elective course called Current Legal Issues, the U.S. Senate, and that will be open to upper-level law students. Mr. Feingold's third term in the Senate ended on Monday. His replacement, Ron Johnson, a Republican businessman from Oshkosh, who was sworn in today. We're waiting for senators to come back to the floor. As always, you can learn more on all of these stories at our website, cspan.org. And as we wait here, here's another AP story for you. The Associated Press reporting today that the White House says President Barack Obama will likely announce his new chief economic advisor this Friday, the same day the government issues its monthly unemployment report. Gene Sperling, a Treasury official and deficit hawk with ties to Wall Street and the Clinton administration, is considered the most likely candidate to take over as director of the National Economic Council. He would replace Lawrence Summers, who's returned to his teaching position at Harvard University. Other White House staff changes expected in the next few days, and the government will issue the December unemployment report on Friday. The unemployment rate continues near 10%. President Obama has said creating jobs and getting people back to work will be his highest priority for the remaining 2 years of his term. That the Associated Press. We're waiting for senators to come back here to the floor of the Senate. We expect more work here on the first day of the 112th Congress. A number of new senators still taking, I can see on C-SPAN 3, our coverage, taking their turn to get their ceremonial reenactment of their swearing in the old Senate chamber with Vice President Biden. One note as we watched the swearing in on the floor of the Senate earlier, and we're seeing some of these reenactments, that nothing is required by the Constitution in terms of anything that the senators hold. Some hold a Bible or some other item, but they are not required to by the Constitution. They are required to take an oath, and that oath is specified by law. One other story we can look at, the Associated Press reporting that Rand Paul was sworn in as the next Republican U.S. Senator from Kentucky today, and he joins his father, the Representative Republican Ron Paul of Texas. Rand Paul has told the Daily News of Bowling Green, Kentucky, that his wife Kelly and their 3 children are attending the ceremony today, as well as their brothers and sisters, and then they will have a joint reception. It says here in the AP story that the 2 Pauls plan to share a Washington apartment to save money. Rand Paul joked that the father and son would, quote, see how that goes. Most kids get kicked out after college. That from the Associated Press today.
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, I ask that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.